By watching liberal cable news TV, you might have gotten the impression that Washington, D.C. is very upset that President Trump deployed the National Guard to crack down on crime in the city. But the opposite appears to be true, actually. Here's what we know. From the Washington Post, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser issued an executive order that would welcome federal law enforcement officials to stay in the city indefinitely. If that doesn't indicate a quiet, yes, Trump, please help me solve this problem because we are incapable of doing so by ourselves, and actually there are rampant arbitrary carjackings and other juvenile delinquent crime, please and thank you, but don't tell our progressive friends. I don't know what does. What this DC crime situation has really highlighted to me is Trump's unique political ability to trap Democrats, at least rhetorically, if not also on the merits and legally. He's done this with illegal immigration and the border crisis under Biden and other 80-20 issues, or you could even say 90-10 issues that the public overwhelmingly favors tackling, but Democrats decide to be on the extreme. They lurch further left and left on all of these, and as a result, they lose elections like they did in 2024. And that's what happened with the DC crime situation. Trump says, hey, I live here, our government is based here, this is our nation's capital, supposedly one of the jewels of our great country, and here's a prime opportunity to score a political victory and improve domestic tranquility, as the preamble of the Constitution says. Ben Shapiro summed it up well.
President Trump does have a habit of wrong-footing his political opponents in a unique way on this sort of stuff. There were 574 murders in Chicago last year. And you can make the argument, I think a plausible argument, that National Guard troops should not be on the ground enforcing crime, both legally and just as a matter of general policy. But if the position you end up taking is that there is no serious crime emergency in Chicago on a rhetorical level, not on a legal level, on a rhetorical level, or you make the case that actually crime in Chicago just isn't that big of a deal, which seems to be the mistake that many Democratic politicians are making right now, Trump is going to win that battle all day long.
And again, this has been a weeks-long debate now, but that is what they started the conversation with, was Trump is a tyrant for deploying the National Guard, and how Democrats justified this position was by pointing to statistics that crime is technically down in the district, and that is true. But it's like a house being on fire. The burning is slightly less this year, but the house is still on fire. This is still very much an existential issue to the city at the current levels of violence, which are untenable. This is not a level that should be tolerable to anyone, regardless of political party, Democratic or Republican. From 2016 to 2022, juveniles in the district committed crimes at twice the national average, and, quote, the percentage of homicides and non-fatal shootings perpetrated by youth aged 15 to 20 almost doubled in the 3 years from 2021 through June 2024. So this is still very much an issue affecting way too many people every single year in DC, even if on the margins things have improved. And just to address the dictatorship accusations from Democrats, not at all the case. Trump absolutely has the authority to intervene in Washington, D.C. because it is a federal enclave. And when he declared the public safety emergency last month, Trump invoked a provision of the D.C. Home Rule Act that allows the president to take control of the city's police force in conditions of an emergency nature. The invocation of that rule technically only applies for 30 days. The expiration date is coming up, but as I said, Muriel Bowser actually is paving the way for that to be extended. She wants it to go beyond 30 days, presumably because she likes the fact that crime is down because of Trump. But instead of giving Trump any credit on this issue, Democrats are saying, well, actually, crime is just a casual default fact of life in our metropolitan areas, in our cities. Crime is good, actually. That's kind of the implication you get out of this. From an optics standpoint, Democrats look like they're in major denial that crime even exists in DC. Like, it's not something to worry about at the ridiculous levels it's at now, but it's not just about DC residents who currently live there. It's about those who visit our nation's capital, the tourists, the commuters, those who come in from out of state, because not everybody can have Senator Chuck Schumer's large security detail following him around and protecting him morning, noon, and night.
Thing to do. Senator, are you scared walking around Washington, D.C. these days?
I walk around all the time. I wake up early in the morning sometimes and take a nice walk as the sun is rising around some of the Capitol and the other monuments and things, and I feel perfectly safe. They're full of it.
And Democratic lawmakers really should have more concern for this, given that some of their own teams of staffers have been affected by crime in the district. In February 2023, Representative Angie Craig of Minnesota, Democrat, was assaulted in her apartment elevator. The perpetrator's attorney said his client faced a number of issues at the time of the assault, including drug abuse and homelessness. Those are very common DC issues, and that he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia and mental disabilities. In October 2023, Democratic Representative Henry Cuellar was thankfully unhurt when masked carjackers, another very common problem in DC, held him at gunpoint and made off with his white 2019 Toyota at K Street and New Jersey Avenue in Navy Yard. How is this okay? In May 2024, a staffer for Democratic Representative Sarah Jacobs of California was carjacked at gunpoint in Navy Yard by 2 juveniles. So this is actually affecting lawmakers, Democrats, and also some Republicans. And by taking action with the National Guard, by temporarily taking over the DC Police Department, Trump ended up calling the Democrats bluff because everyone knows they were never going to fix their crime problem themselves. They had no political incentive to do so. They really didn't care if anarchy prevailed. So Trump noticed that the left-leaning government was inept, had no interest in solving this crime issue. And here are the stats to prove that. From 2012 to 2023, the DC police budget remained pretty flat when adjusted for inflation. Yet during that time, the number of cops on the beat declined from 3,800 in 2020 to approximately 3,100 officers today. So that's 700 cops taken off the beat in those years, despite the budget for the police department not really changing. So if you lose 700 cops, you can't really expect crime to not still be an issue or even increase in the city. Just to put this in perspective, the entire city of Oakland has budgeting for 678 sworn police officers. Now, DC, as I mentioned, kind of has shared ownership in a way. The federal government dips its toe into DC's management, but so do some local officials. Many of them are Democratic. So DC has a position of attorney general who focuses on misdemeanor offenses, minor infractions, and civil litigation. The current office holder, Brian Schwab, has said, quote, "We cannot prosecute and arrest our way out of the crime situation in DC." So just having that attitude that law enforcement doesn't even work to deter and stop crime is in a nutshell the problem. Because yes, you can arrest and prosecute your way out of crime. That is how this works. But Mr. Schwab over here was too busy, I imagine, going after Federalist Society co-chair Leonard Leo. That's a organization that is basically dedicated to helping conservative lawyers in the legal field. This guy, Leonard Leo, has still had no charges filed against him 2 years later, but Schwab was very preoccupied investigating him instead of focusing on DC's very persistent crime problem. We have a story of misplaced priorities here. An AG of Washington, D.C., not interested in jailing violent juvenile offenders or otherwise. And this was the backdrop for Trump to intervene. But now that we're a couple weeks into this, the outrage has subsided slightly, and now we even have Democratic officials who are admitting, actually, we needed this help all along. Muriel Bowser is tacitly saying that Trump's strategy is working because law enforcement officers have arrested more than 1,000 people in DC in the weeks since Trump's deployment of the National Guard. According to administrative officials, the administration has touted a further drop in crime amid the takeover, with Trump calling DC a crime-free zone in a recent post on Truth Social. And Muriel Bowser noted in her order that violent crime in the district has noticeably decreased since Trump's federalization of the city's police force. So she can't ignore it any longer. I recently visited Washington, D.C., and there was a palpable calm over the city. There were certain neighborhoods that I normally would feel scared to walk through, and I didn't because there weren't any vagrants or dangerous characters out and about as I normally would expect. And yeah, I did see National Guard members walking around, not with weapons or anything, but they had a deterrent force on those neighborhoods. You could see it with your own eyes. It was obvious. And I imagine if I were Bowser, I'd say, as much as I want to protest Trump's intervention, I'm actually appreciating the help here because the quality of life is going to improve in this city. And she's probably thinking about her political career. Probably is a good look to have presided over a safer city during her tenure. So naturally, if we're talking about cities infected with crime in the United States, we have to talk about our very own war zone in the United States, Chicago.
When 20 people are killed over the last 2.5 weeks and 75 are shot with bullets. So let me tell you a little story about a place called D.C., District of Columbia, right here where we are. It's now a safe zone. We have no crime. It's in such great shape. You can go and actually walk with your children, your wife, your husband. You can walk right down the middle of the street. You're not going to be shot, Peter. You're safe.
Trump has teased sending the National Guard to Chicago as well, citing its pretty horrific data with regards to crime. The city had the most homicides of any U.S. city in 2024. For 13 consecutive years, Chicago has had the most murders of any U.S. city. For 7 consecutive years, Chicago has had the highest murder rate among U.S. cities, with more than 1 million people. In 2024, Chicago's murder rate per capita was 3 times higher than Los Angeles and nearly 5 times higher than New York City. As many have said before, we don't have to live like this. We don't have to accept this level of violence in cities that previously held a lot of promise, that are centers of innovation, of commerce, of capitalism, that have a lot of beauty. Chicago is on one of the Great Lakes. It's a fantastic place until you take into account how much mayhem and just lawlessness there is in certain neighborhoods. And a big problem here is that of all the almost 148,000 reported crimes since January 1st in Chicago, the arrests that have resulted is just 16.2%. How is that possible? That of all of those reported crimes, a fraction of them actually ended in arrests. So arrests just aren't happening in Chicago at the rate they need to be. And what would obviously help with that is more cops. And as of last September, Chicago, similar to DC, had insufficient numbers of cops. They had about 1,600 fewer officers than they had in 2018. As a WGN report put it, quote, the number of police officers is at or near record lows. Unlike Washington, D.C., Chicago is not a federal enclave, so President Trump and his administration don't have the kind of jurisdiction to intervene in the police department there, as feckless as they may be at combating serious crime. But Trump has, just like other presidents before him, Republican and Democratic alike, cited, or I should say proclaimed, national emergencies as justification to send in the National Guard. He theoretically could do the same thing in Chicago if it rose to the level of national emergency. Obviously, that's a subjective idea, and Trump is currently dealing with some legal cases with his previous invocation of national emergencies, like in California, if you recall what happened with the ICE detention centers. But I digress. We'll find out if he actually does send the National Guard to Chicago. But regardless of whether this happens in Chicago or not, the progressive mayors of blue states and cities around this country are in a very vulnerable position right now because Trump is bringing attention to their weakest issues, and they should recognize that. Brandon Johnson, he's a radical leftist now leading Chicago, wholly unqualified to do so. In my opinion, at least, he's very radical. He has a history of Black Lives Matter activism, which gives you an indication of how he conceptualizes crime. And as a very progressive mayor, Brandon Johnson is positioning himself as the perfect foil to President Trump on the crime issue as he advocates for social justice policies instead of real policing. And he's taking the opposite approach to Muriel Bowser. He said he's going to actively resist working with Trump on crime if he does send the National Guard. And he's putting up a fight the whole way. He recently signed an executive order declaring that local police officers will not work with or collaborate with any federal officers or National Guard troops if Trump deploys them to Chicago. Even leftist networks have tried to question him on his policing ideas because, again, this crime thing, 80-20 issue, 90-10 even, it's become so salient thanks to Trump's amazing political instincts that even networks that you wouldn't expect to be covering this are covering this. Brandon Johnson was in the hot seat, and his answer was not compelling. Play the clip.
I'm curious, and this does come down to an ideological difference between people. Do you believe that the streets of Chicago would be safer if there were more uniformed police officers on the streets of Chicago?
I believe the city of Chicago and cities across America would be safer if we actually had, affordable housing.
Just this past weekend, at least 54 people were shot in Chicago. 7 died as a result. And that was a significant uptick from Labor Day weekend last year. That also represented a doubling of the number of shootings that occurred in the city the previous weekend. So given that really sad context, how is affordable housing going to fix the crime problem in Chicago? Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. I agree.
As you heard, Johnson said that social programs are the real solution here, not cops. And there's no surprise there, again, because of his history with Black Lives Matter. But the research contradicts Mr. Johnson. The research consistently finds that interventions meant to alleviate economic privation reduce property crime, but have no effect on violent crime. And that's from studies conducted by Charles Lehman of the Manhattan Institute. Johnson also thinks that we are incarcerating too much, especially in Chicago. He's pretty much one step away from being a prison abolitionist. I would argue it's the opposite. Chicago needs more incarceration. But overall, zooming out here, it doesn't help that the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Chicago, a very Democratic official, they have their heads in the sand on this issue. Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois adamantly disagree. It doesn't help that the mayor of Chicago, but also the governor of Illinois, have their heads in the sands on this issue. J.B. Pritzker also adamantly disagrees with the president's intention or hope to send the National Guard to Chicago. He told CBS News the alleged plan is an invasion and that it's clear that in secret they're planning this. Well, it's an invasion with U.S. troops if they, in fact, do that. Democrats would be wise to follow the example of Muriel Bowser, not the example of Brandon Johnson and J.B. Pritzker. Bowser, again, is working with Trump on things that almost have like unanimous support among normal people in America. Ending violent crime. What could be controversial about that? But the governors and mayors of blue cities, blue states that continue to obstruct Trump and fight him on this are going to continue to look like fools, and they're going to continue to look like they don't care about the well-being and safety of their own citizens. That is an essential function of government at the end of the day. You could argue that that's the most basic function of government, is protecting your citizens. Everything else is just icing on top and extra things, superfluous things. But if you cannot ensure that your residents aren't carjacked in broad daylight, or aren't held at gunpoint, or aren't assaulted on the street, or that women who are commuting alone on the subway or public transportation aren't attacked, then you have failed in your job as a governor. Our channel is thriving so far, which I'm so happy about. I'll be traveling for a couple of weeks, and during that time, we're going to be renovating our studio. You're the first to hear about it. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Ring that bell for notifications, and thank you so much for your support already in this journey. It means the world to us.